Hey, what's going on guys? So today I have two small form factor PC cases that I can finally show you guys, and ones that you guys have been asking me about since I showed them off at Computex this year. So on my left we have the Raijintek Ophion, the regular air-cooled version, and on my right we have the Ophion Evo, the 240mm water-cooled version. So these two cases are exactly the same up until this point here, except for the Ophion Evo adds radiator support. So in this one, you can add up to a 240mm radiator in the top compartment there, which we will be testing and taking a look at. But the best part about these cases is the price, which is nice and refreshing after a fairly expensive market when it comes to optimized cases. So most of you are familiar with the NKSM1, which I've been using as my daily driver for a while, and the Dan A4, which I reviewed just last week. Now, those two cases are pretty expensive, and that's what sort of gets a lot of people riled up a little bit. They don't want to spend up to $200 on a case. So the NKSM1 is $195, I believe, at the moment, and the Dan A4 is $225. These cases though are $119 for the Ophion, the regular one, and $129 for the Evos. And that is a massive saving compared to those more premium options, and could easily be spent towards a better hardware like a better CPU or a better graphics card. And so today we're going to look at what that amount of money can get you in terms of value. In terms of size and overall volume, both the Dan A4 and NKSM1 are more compact than the Ophions, coming in at 7.2 liters and 12.6 liters of volume respectively, with the Ophion and Ophion Evo coming in at 16.9 and 20.1 liters respectively. Now, I measured this myself since I didn't receive any official spec sheet or material, and I also factored in the protrusions as well, like the thumb screws and windows, so just keep that in mind. Now, both the Ophion and Ophion Evo are built off the same design. They're quite literally the same case up until the extra radiator headroom for the Ophion Evo. At the top of the regular Ophion though, you can still fit two 120mm fans quite comfortably. They also have the exact same footprint, being 373mm long and 186mm wide. And they both also use the same sandwich design that has the motherboard and power supply on one side and the GPU on the other side of the case, connected to a stealthy riser cable, an identical layout to the Dan A4. The power button is a little too big though in my opinion, considering that aluminium small form factor cases are usually designed around minimalism. It does light up white when the system is on, but the front I/O cable was just a tad too short to reach my motherboard, which has the headers near the I/O. Something that these two cases have that is really quite absent on a lot of small form factor options though is a tempered glass side panel, and you get this on both the Ophion and Ophion Evo, which are secured via thumb screws on an extruded mount, and on both sides as well. There is a sticker on one of the side panels though, but that can easily be removed. We can also expect to see the breathable aluminium side panels, which we took a look at Computex. They should be available at launch too, from what Rajintek have told me, but it's not clear whether these will be included or available as a different option. The front and side panels are a brushed aluminium, which is finished in a dark grey, and the top panel is steel but covered with a magnetic dust filter. Both support 2-slot graphics cards roughly up to 340mm long and 125mm high if you are using the top mounted fans or radiator, as you should be. Whether you go with a blower style card or open air is completely up to you, and we'll take a look at my open air GPU testing in just a minute. Drive support is one thing that is different between the two here though. The regular Ophion has support for a single 2.5-inch drive only at the front, whereas the Evo has support for two, but unfortunately no support for 3.5-inch drives at all here, which I thought was a bit odd, especially because there is room for one here, at least in the Evo. You'll also find a 120mm fan slot right underneath the motherboard as well, towards the back of the case, and when configured as a bottom intake, this blows cool air directly at the top of the motherboard and also behind it as well. If your motherboard's V-Core VRM is located at the top of the board, this fan will undoubtedly improve VRM thermals significantly, but the board I used for testing only saw a 3-degree drop because the V-Core VRM is on the side of the board next to the I/O. The fan also improves CPU thermals by about 1 degree, but that's not really significant. Alternative to using a fan here, I would have loved to see the option to add another 2.5-inch driver or two here, since the fan doesn't yield a massive benefit for thermals, at least with my configuration, and some users might value that extra storage space over a couple degree improvement. I measured CPU clearance to be 86mm from the top of the CPU, and this actually allows for a fairly decent range of top-down coolers, including AMD's Wraith Spire, which I used while testing the air cooling setup. Raijintek also told me that you can swap out the glass panel mounts for slightly longer ones, and this allows for a few millimeters of extra CPU clearance, and I'm assuming these mounts will come with the finished product. And so looking at CPU temperatures with the Ryzen 5 2600 in Prime 95, we can see a couple things. Firstly, CPU temperatures here certainly aren't bad, given that this is a 6-core CPU in a demanding workload. And secondly, Rajintek have implemented the tempered glass side panel quite well, as temperatures didn't soar alarmingly, about 3.5 degrees warmer compared to having the side panel off. The GPU saw a similar delta when removing the side panel, operating at 66 degrees C with the panel off and 70 degrees C with the panel on. So the tempered glass panels are definitely affecting thermals here, but arguably it's not significant if you are already using effectively cooled hardware, but that's going to depend on your setup. So between these two cases, the most exciting feature between them is the radiator support in the Ophion Evo by far. There's no other cases on the market that have this sandwich design and a 240mm radiator support at the top. In fact, there's not many cases at 20 liters or under that have water cooling support regardless. So you've got 240 support here with some wiggle room in terms of positioning, and you could in theory run a dual 120mm setup for your GPU and CPU if that's what you're after. Before we get into the results, let's discuss installation. You need to remove both the glass panel and the aluminium panel that it mounts to, tuck away any excess cables, and then maneuver the radiator in with the fans pre-installed underneath it, and then secure it from the top. Overall, it's pretty simple and straightforward, but it could be a bit easier. Firstly, ATX power supplies are often bundled with ATX size cables, and this makes an absolute mess of cable management, consequently making it a little bit more difficult to situate both the radiator and tubing on an AIO. Next is the divider that runs down the middle of the case to separate the two compartments, and the issue here is that it's too tall to comfortably route the tubing. The Kraken X52 that I use for testing has fairly flexible tubing and was able to squeeze in there, but one of the tubes was still being pressed quite tightly up against that divider. This also makes it impossible to mount the radiator with the fans at the top of the case if that's what you wanted to do, so I really would have liked to see that divider tapered down towards the front to allow for better installation of an AIO. Once it's in there though, it sure does look beautiful, and the performance is pretty nice as well. Here we saw around a 20-degree reduction from the R5 2600 in Prime 95, now sitting in the mid 50s, leaving plenty of headroom for an R7 2700 or i7 8700K. Also notice the negligible increase in thermals between the glass panel on and off here. That's definitely great to see compared to the air cooling configuration. So overall, I'm pretty happy with what these two cases are offering for the price. $119 for the air-cooled Ophion and $129 for the Ophion Evo with water cooling support. They really do strike a section of the market which is arguably niche but needs to be filled, and that's small form factor cases that aren't playing it safe but also don't cost over $200 US. So what are the main differences here compared to those more premium options? And after working with the Ncase M1 and Dan A4, I can definitely think of a couple. The first one is build quality. Now, the build quality on the Ncase M1 and Dan A4 are really just out of this world. They're pretty much as good as it gets when it comes to a PC enclosure. The build quality here is roughly average. It's certainly not bad. Certainly better than something like the Cougar QBX, which was steel and plastic. But yeah, it's not on the same level as those $200 options, so just keep that in mind. The second thing is hardware compatibility, and as an example, the Ophion Evo can only fit a single 2.5-inch drive, which compared to the Dan A4, which is a lot smaller, in that case can fit 3 2.5-inch drives. So I feel like there could have been slightly better hardware compatibility here, since we are working with bigger cases compared to the Dan A4 and Ncase M1. Now my last suggestion to Rajintek would be to ditch the ATX power supply altogether for future generations of this case. SFX units are plenty powerful enough these days. We have options from Silverstone up to 800 watts, which is absolutely mental. And you can still get your hands on a common unit from Corsair that's up to 600 watts, an 80 plus gold rated power supply, the SF600. You can get your hands on that in pretty much any store. Now, Dropping down to SFX opens up a couple of improvements for these cases. First up, you're going to improve the overall volume and compactness of the case because SFX units are shorter than ATX units, and making the case a little bit shorter doesn't really interfere with the hardware compatibility that you currently see. So starting with the graphics card, as you can see, we've got a regular RX 570 here at the moment, and there is quite a bit of room here at the front. Currently, you've got support for up to 340 mils of clearance length, which in my opinion is probably just a tad too much. Coming back to the hardware compatibility sort of improvements that I would like to see, it would have been good to see, for example, at the front there, some drive mounting options if you are using a regular GPU or a shorter GPU that we have here. With radiator clearance, there's not going to be any issues either, since we do have quite a little bit of wiggle room at the top there. Dropping down the unit to SFX shouldn't mess with things there either. Now, saying all of that, I still think that these two cases in their current state are pretty unbelievable in terms of value. There's nothing on the market right now that can touch what these cases can offer for the price. In my opinion, the hero between the two would be the Ophion Evo, considering you're spending $10 more to jump up to the Ophion Evo, and then you're getting the 240mm radiator support, which is going to be crucial for those who are planning on future-proofing their small form factor systems for the next few years. Release date for the two is said to be August 28th with shelf stock in September. So if you're watching this video after September, then feel free to check out the links down in the description. I'll have some links for you there. Otherwise, guys, let me know what you think of these two cases and if you are planning on picking either of these up. Thank you all so much for watching. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one.